Dan, can you hear me before I, ooh, that's loud. Or anyone?
Says you are muted up there.
Doesn't say it on mine.
Now try it.
It should be coming in on the phone. No, the presenter is muted. But we're coming in under town meeting, so we should be fine. They should be getting it from the speaker.
Is that the presenter?
Yeah. No, presenters.
Is this mic hooked up to the presenter?
This one is when I call in.
Is John still here?
Okay.
Tell me, you guys are telling me what the presenter.
Can anyone online hear us?
I don't know if we called in the wrong number. Do you have that? Because I used the same number that I had from Mike's email.
So you can hang up on that.
Okay. Okay, let's do that one instead.
Please enter your access
Great,
code,
okay, that should
followed
work.
by the
Thanks, John.
pound or hash.
Yeah, and both were logged into the wrong one. That was on me.
Please enter your access code, followed by the pound. To enable audio controls, please enter your audio PIN, followed by the pound or hash sign.
Okay. Dan or anyone else, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, there we go. There we go. Great. All right, sorry, everyone. All right. Good evening and welcome to the February 28th meeting of the Auburn Board of Selectmen. This meeting is being recorded. Is there anyone in the audience also recording? Seeing none, can we stand and salute the flag?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Under public comments, we have our town clerk, Deb Grimo. Shannon, are you you able to hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
Good evening. I just wanted to let you know that the town election, the annual town election, is May 17th this year, Tuesday. Nomination papers are now available. We have a lot of open seats. If anybody wants to come in and run. Due to the re-precincting, all 120 seats are back on the ballot this year. The incumbents, just have to sign a sheet. However, there'll be 24 town meeting member seats in each precinct that will go on the ballot. So I just really wanted to reiterate that, the election is coming up in 2 months. You still have a month to take out nomination papers, and if anybody's interested, give us a call or email us, or if anybody has any questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Under public hearings and presentations, we have briefing on the draft compliance guidelines related to the new requirements in Section 3A of Chapter 40A in the MBTA communities. This is the same as 5B and 6B. So can I have a motion to take agenda items 3A, 5B, and 6B together?
So moved.
Second.
All right, by roll call vote. Mr. Berthium?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So I know, oh, you're already set up, great. I'll turn things over to you.
Good evening. Those of you that don't know me, my name's Adam Bernard. I'm the town planner. I have a brief presentation for you about recent state law that was changed affecting zoning, and specifically affecting the town of Auburn and the MBTA communities really across the Commonwealth. All right, so there was a zoning act update last year to Chapter 40A. Specifically, it was redefining what an MBTA community is. So an MBTA community is one of 14 cities and towns that was initially issued MBTA service, meaning the commuter rail. One of 51 cities and towns that host MBTA service, but join later after those initial 14. And other served communities that abut a city or town that hosts an MBTA service, which the town does abut Worcester, which hosts a commuter rail service. There are other qualifiers. In total, there are 175 MBTA communities across the Commonwealth that are subject to this new change in the Chapter 48A law. So here's a map of all the communities affected. The only one that has MBTA service that's not affected is Boston, who's exempt from this particular law. But as you can see up here, Auburn abuts Worcester, which has the commuter rail. So what does this mean for Auburn? So basically, there's a requirement for the town to have a zoning ordinance or bylaw that provides at least one district of quote-unquote reasonable size, which multifamily housing is permitted as of right, provided, however, such multi-housing shall be without age restriction, et cetera. There's a lot of qualifiers there for the multifamily, but essentially you're required to have multifamily housing by right. If you don't have this particular bylaw in place, it puts you at risk for not qualifying for several grant programs, and these are substantial grant programs, which include the Local Capital Projects Fund, the MassWorks Infrastructure Program, and the Housing Choice Initiative. These offer substantial possibilities for grant funding, so it's important to be qualified for these programs. And as it stands right now, Auburn would not qualify under this new law. So why are we here tonight? To remain in compliance with this new section, while the DHCD is collecting public comment, we're required to, by May 5th, have a presentation, which that's what this is tonight, is the presentation. Complete and submit an MBTA community information form, which I'll be doing probably later this week or in the coming weeks. And to submit updated GIS parcel map, which I don't think Auburn will need to do, but the state will tell us if we need to have updated maps. So basically temporarily for 2022, all we need to do is submit this form, but we want to take some proactive steps anyways to make sure that we remain qualified for those grant programs. So how is Auburn working to comply with Section 3A? And for the 2022 cycle, MBTA community is deemed to achieve interim compliance by completing this form and doing this presentation. It requires a district to be of reasonable size. And again, that's part of the draft guidelines. We don't know exactly what reasonable size means, but we'll find out. And a multi-family district should be located in an area with reasonable access to transit stations based on existing street patterns, pedestrian connections, etc. So the state's trying to promote housing density, basically. So some of the draft guidelines, I'm not going to read through all these, but it's basically telling us that we need to contribute to the housing stock, and we need to allow multifamilies by right. As I said, currently Auburn zoning bylaws, all apartment buildings are by special permit, as well as site plan approval. So something later on in the agenda is a recommendation or to go to town meeting to move to adjust the zoning bylaw to make apartments by right in certain districts. By right doesn't mean they can just build anywhere. They would still require site plan permitting. So there is still, it's not just a free-for-all for for a building, there still is that check that the planning board would have to permit these buildings if they were to be built with a site plan approval. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. We're still waiting on more details from the state. They're putting together guidelines, so we'll have more information in the coming months. But the important thing was to have this presentation and have this meeting so we can bank qualify for the next year. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Board members have any questions? Mr. Carpenter?
Not at this time.
All right, thanks. Is there anything else from town administration on this?
I think that's it. As Adam said, and I want to thank him for doing a great job on this. This has been ongoing for a while on the state level, and the goal was to try to get the multifamily by right through the Housing Choice Program, and this was the final legislation that was passed to enable the state to push forward on this type of initiative. So the question comes up all the time, and comes up from residents in other towns, why? Why do we have to do it if we don't have an MBTA commuter rail station here? But Adam went through and explained why. So we have to do this. There is no way to get out of this. It's not an option. But I think our current zoning isn't that far off from what they're requiring. The piece that, as Adam said, we don't know how large the zoning area is going to be. There's been various discussions of certain amount of acreage, but that has not been finalized. I believe the state is still taking comments
Correct.
until mid-March or end of March on the current guidelines, because they are just draft. So they will finalize them, and then we'll be able to move forward. But what you have before you tonight that you just took out of order, the next item would be a vote to transmit the proposed zoning bylaw to the planning board, which is the process before it goes to town meeting for a vote.
Thank you. If there's nothing, Mr. Berthing?
Do we know if the multifamilies have to be within a certain number of miles from the Worcester border, being that they're the abutting, that they're the city that has the MBTA?
Yeah, I don't think I haven't seen anything specific with miles, but just the fact that Auburn abuts Worcester means Auburn is an MBTA community. Even if we don't have direct service, all abutting towns to any city or MBTA service has to fit these requirements.
Because I assume that the multifamily that's going up off of Blaker is gonna be a qualifier for us, right?
It depends on the requirements of the zone, right, as far as acreage.
Right. I think the important thing with what we've seen so far is the fact that Auburn doesn't have any apartment buildings by right. It's only by special permit, and to qualify for those grant programs, it has to be by right, which is site plan permitting only, not the special permit. So,
I think it's
So-
at 15 units per acre in the verbiage he had up there.
Yeah,
So that probably would qualify.
that should qualify, right?
And I think the clarifying piece here is the town isn't required to have that amount of units. We're required to zone to allow for that many units. So this isn't an effort that specifically has to tie into the actual building of these units yet. So
Just
when
the
those those units are built, if it meets the new state requirements, then it would count toward that, but it still needs to have the zoning in place to encourage others to do it.
Okay, thank you.
The chair, do you have an idea of what areas we're putting them in? We're just going to adjust certain residential areas already?
so the proposal for the zoning change would be the RA, RB, and LB district.
Okay.
Those are the more denser developed areas already. They have small lot sizes, so
Yep.
kind of figure to keep density in areas that already have density,
Where there's
not the
already
outskirts of town.
Sure. Okay.
Anything else from any board members? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to transmit the proposed zoning bylaw amendment to the planning board for public hearing in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 40A.
So moved?
Second?
By a roll call vote. Mr. Berthing?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
No.
Ms. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. It's 3-1. Sharon, did you get the vote count on motion?
Yes, 3-1.
All right, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
All right, moving on, under agenda items 4A, we have a letter of request for Water Street renaming to Veterans Way. With that, I'll turn things over to the town manager.
Yes. Through the chair, you have a letter in your packet that we received from Sheila and Gary Conroy regarding a request to rename a portion of Water Street. And this is the portion between Oxford and Southford Street, where there are no current residences or homes on that property. So those are all vacant land. If you recall, they had applied for and received permission or approval from the planning board to install a monument for this particular family member, for Robert Conroy, who was a World War II veteran. So the family is requesting that we rename that portion of the street to be Veterans Way. And I believe, my understanding is because they felt that it would be in keeping with the Veterans Corridor. Right across the street on Water Street is another Veterans Park. I've also been informed that the family has worked with Representative Frost to file legislation to name the portion of the bridge overpass in that area, right, the state bridge that goes right over Water Street.
290.
Yes. So that piece of legislation is moving through the legislature right now. So this would be to name a street. So in the meantime, we received this request. We forwarded it to Town Council Robert Hennigan for an opinion on the process for renaming the street. So he is doing, with Adam Menard, a lot of research on how the street came to be, and apparently how it came to be is going to dictate how it can be renamed. So the question that we're looking at is whether it has to go back to the planning board, whether it goes direct to town meeting, or whether the Board of Selectmen has the authority to rename the street. So we will keep you informed, but we wanted to get this letter on the agenda because it did come in last week. And we just don't have an answer yet. I know Deb Grimo also was doing some research on town meeting votes, and at this point has not found any town meeting votes that actually pertained to Water Street or the naming of it. So a little bit more research, I believe, through the Registry of Deeds is required.
Do board members have any questions or comments?
I'll just say that, not sure what our options will be, but, thank you to the Conroy family for all the efforts that they've put in so far. And, if I'm looking at it right, it's a nice little area to put that memorial up. So I look forward to that area being spruced up a little bit.
Anything else? I just want to ask the town manager. I know that this part of, or this road has no buildings on it, so that wouldn't be a problem renaming the road and changing addresses. But if we were to ever do that with, rename a bridge or road that had either businesses or residents on it, would the process be similar? I mean, I know there's a lot we don't know right now, but.
Through the chair, it depends, again, on how the process occurred to get the street there in the
Okay, so
first
it's the
place.
same,
If it was a vote of the planning board, then it may have to go back to the planning board. If it was a vote of town meeting to accept and name, I know with Brotherton Way, it went back to town meeting to change the name of that, to actually not change it, to name that street Brotherton Way. But that was many years ago, so I don't know what led to that. So according to Town Council Hennigan, it all depends on the process for getting the street named in the first place. I know one of the things that he is looking into is whether it was named, if there was any historic significance to naming it, in which case you also may want to, not necessarily have to under the law, but you may want to go back to the Historic Commission and speak to them about it. Town Council also said if you rename a street that has any type of other property owners or businesses, then you should be taking into consideration the impact on those businesses and the property owners to change all their mailing addresses and everything else that's involved. And either way, the post office will be involved as well.
Right.
So he did say this one might be a little less complicated, but he said there's still some complexities to it because there are property owners on the street. They may not be structures, but there are property owners. So there is going to be some type of public notification process and probably some type of hearing. So I guess to answer your question, it all is going to depend wherever this, if there was another request that was made, how the street was initially named.
Okay. I would just like to request, and I don't know if the board would support that, notifying the Historic Commission and letting them know that the street could be renamed, just to give them a head start on any research that they may want to do. I don't know if that sounds okay to everyone else.
Is that, do you want to take a vote on that, to send a letter to them?
Yeah, do we want to make that an official vote, or I'm just asking to let the Historic Commission know?
I'll make a motion to put the Historical Commission on notice so they, for the purpose of them doing research to see the origin of Water Street.
And I'll second that.
All right, Sharon, did you get that? Just a motion to notify the Historic Commission?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thanks. By roll call vote, Mr. Berthium?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. All right, is there anything else on the proposal to rename Water Street Veterans Way? Seeing none? We have a common vic license for La Quinta Inn at 446 Southwood Street. Enclosed is the letter from the DCG. Is there a representative? Hi. I guess, yeah, you can come up and join us at the table. Yeah, right here. Chris, the microphone at the end of this table will work, right? Or will we need the,
Eddie,
yeah,
just,
that one?
if you move that down, it will work.
Okay, great. Great. Thanks for coming in. So if you want to just give your name and address for the record and explain why you're here.
I'm Tanisha Parker, the current general manager for the La Quinta Inn on 446 Southbridge Street in Arbor.
Great, thanks. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what the license is that you're applying for?
I'm applying for the hotel and common victor license. We are currently up and running. We changed ownership this January 6, 2022. So everything basically stays the same. It's just a matter of changing ownership. We still have been up and running. We have not shut down. So we're just looking to change over ownership.
Great, thanks. Any questions from board members? Mr. Berthium? Yeah.
Just, so it says accommodations, meals, and other services. Are you providing like free breakfast or what?
At the current time, we are doing a complimentary continental breakfast package, bagels, muffins, coffee, and juice. We are looking to change over to a hot item. However, I am in the process of working to get my restaurant license and before we could do that.
Okay.
So as of right now, it's just the cold continental breakfast.
And the previous owners also did that?
Correct.
So the licensing is all,
Yes.
that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from other board members? All right, seeing none, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the license, provided that all applicable requirements of the state and town and any of its departments, boards, and commissions have been fulfilled. Said licenses are subject to all conditions stated upon them. Failure to comply with any and all the conditions shall invalidate the license and render it null and void, and with the conditions of the DCG to be placed on the licenses.
Second.
By roll call vote, Mr. Berthium?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, gift acceptances. We have $300 to the fire department from from Heather. What was that?
I couldn't read it either.
Okay, great.
Heather Ayaderosa.
Ayaderosa, I'll go with that. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve with gratitude.
Second.
By roll call vote, Mr. Berthium?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Proclamations and recognitions, we have none. And then under town manager items, we have the fiscal year 2023 budget that members were able to get last week. So I'll hand that over to the town manager. I don't know if you want to speak to it.
Yeah, sure. Through the chair, thank you very much. our Assistant Town Manager, CFO, Ed Kazanovich, has a very brief presentation on this year's FY23 proposed draft budget. Under our bylaws, we are required to have the board transmit it to the Finance Committee. But I just want to be clear, that doesn't mean that questions can't be asked tonight or any night in the future. It just means to keep to our schedule, we have to transmit it. But certainly, we're open for questions at any time and can continue to provide answers to you if you see something that you didn't see in the last few days when you took a look at it. Are you all set, Ed?
Yeah, Tristan, do you have to make me a presenter?
Yeah, Adam, how are you were able to do it without me changing anything up here?
And while he's doing that, just a reminder, the ARPA hearing, because I know a couple have mentioned it, the ARPA hearing, initially, I think we were going to have it tonight, but then the board had taken a vote to postpone it, continue it, through March 14th. So just to remind people that that would be March 14th. And again, it ties in with the budget. It's not exactly the entire budget presentation, but certainly it ultimately may tie in on the CIP aspect of it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, gotcha. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity for us to present to you tonight the FY23 budget. Certainly, this has been, the conclusion of this budget has been done over the past, 8 weeks. So it's been a long process. We know this is not going to be the final product. Once it goes through the Finance Committee, there may be some tweaks, some changes, but this is our recommendation at this point, based upon certain things that are known, and we know things are going to fluctuate and move. So we're going to give you our best projections now, our recommendations, and we'll keep you informed if there are any changes that may warrant a consideration or an amendment to the budget. So as we look at the budget, the request before you tonight, and we ask your consideration tonight to vote to transmit it to the Finance Committee, who has a scheduled meeting this Wednesday for their start of their budget deliberations. We're recommending right now total appropriations of $76,118,951, with an equal amount of revenue balancing out the budget. As a result of our recommendations, we are seeking to increase the budget by 2.58%, or roughly $1.913 million over current fiscal year. The same would hold true for the revenue. It would be an estimated increase of 2.58. As we look at our revenue sources, we're estimating roughly an additional $410,000 of local receipts. That's about a 4% increase. Cherry sheet revenue, using the first set of numbers, the governor's recommendation, we're going to yield an additional $1.8 million, or 12.7%. Tax levy, we're going to raise an additional $1,088,000. I'll get into the specifics of that in a little bit. And there'll be a reduction of available funds of roughly 1.3, and these are typically funding sources through free cash that we bring in the fall. That's why there's a reduction now, because these FY22 numbers reflect those supplemental appropriations. Once again, total revenue of 1.913, the same level of increase on the appropriation side. So here's just our recommendation based upon FY22 current appropriation. You have all the detail in the books that were provided to you. They were available on Friday, February 18th. Certainly, we wanted to give you some time to look through the books, look at the detail behind our recommendations. But these are the final recommendations for the appropriation of each department and division. Once again, if we look at the total, it's $76,118,861. Some of the budget notables that we identified in terms of new positions at the school department, there are 2 new school licensed practical nurses. There's a .6 FTE, a school strings teacher. That was proposed by the school department, and 2 school assistant golf coaches. Those would be stipend positions, but they're new. On the town side, we are recommending a new position, a deputy chief. That position would commence roughly on January 1, 2023. We are, with the DDIS has proposed a part-time conservation agent. It was recommended in the budget, but after further investigation, we are allowed to charge that to the conservation fund. That would be, those costs would be recouped through conservation fees. And in the golf enterprise account, we are recommending a golf club manager. And once again, that would be offset by enterprise user fees, no tax levy money required for that position. Some other notables, we increased the salary and wage reserve because we are currently negotiating several contracts that are currently being negotiated with a few that have not even, we haven't even begun to commence yet. We know there's going to be an obligation of wages as a result of those contractual obligations, so we provided a sum of money under the salary and wage reserve account. We also increased the reserve account, non-wage, to address what we know right now, inflationary impacts. And I'll get into some of the specifics of that in a later slide. Our Bay Path assessment, we received that a couple of weeks ago. The assessment is up 19% as a result of our enrollment going up by 19 students over the current fiscal year. We have a recommendation for fleet maintenance. The request was in for an additional $30,000 to repair our rolling stock. There are escalating costs for parts that have been seen in the last 6 months and continue to increase. We increased our snow and ice to reflect anticipated increases in salt, and we have to pay our outside drivers a higher wage to be competitive with other communities. And there's a 23% increase in the Packagug Golf Enterprise account. That's primarily for a clubhouse manager and seasonal employment. So when we look at our tax levy, we're estimating in terms of new growth $460,000, which is a conservative number. But this budget recommendation currently taxes at 1.26% out of 2.5%. So we're using just about half of the available 2.5 to fund the request before you tonight. As we look at our 5-year new growth average, as you can see in '22, we recognize about $770,000 of new growth. Over the 5-year period, it's been averaging about $731,000. We're using 450 as an estimate, once again to be conservative, knowing that we can use that additional amount if it's certified and available for either supplemental appropriation or in a continued effort to reduce the tax classification gap. Here's our listing of our local receipts. We did up our estimates for hotel motel. We're seeing a rebound since COVID hit. That's making a return, not as healthy as it once was, but we're seeing some growth there. We're also seeing some growth in meals tax, not as great, but at least it's on the rise again. All of the rest, we basically level funded for now because we're not gonna know our true actuals until roughly June 30th. That's when we make some amendments to the local receipt side and bring in a correction at the fall town meeting if necessary. In summary, once again, our revenues equal our expenses at $76,118,951.82. We're using 1.26% out of 2.5, leaving about $630,000 of unobligated or allowable Prop 2.5 that's not built into the budget at this time. Just to identify some of the budget objectives and some of the concerns we're seeing as a result of the discussions we had with department heads as we formulated our recommendation. Some of the priorities, we increased roadway improvement. We're not at the level we were at pre-COVID. We're shy by about $25,000. We're at 515 recommendation. We're at 535, so roughly 20. Although we believe there's an opportunity this year to receive some state funding to address roadway improvement and pothole funding that would help get us to the levels that we were at pre-COVID. It would be our objective either in the fall to maybe have a supplemental appropriation to get us to the 535 if the state funds do not become available. Even in the long term, that's something we want to achieve, get back to 535. Once again, we want to be able to create and fill a deputy police chief's position effective January. Number of things that have to be done. One, it would have to be approved by town meeting before we could move forward. But there's a lot of work through assessment, center testing, and things of that nature that would be required prior to making a recommendation or an appointment. We want to address some human resource study results. We got a grant for $20,000 to conduct a study. The results of that grant is still unknown, but we are hopefully expecting that in the next 30 to 60 days. That may result in a request to enhance our resources in that department. We continue as a priority to focus on closing the tax classification gap. And we, once again, would like to earmark tax levy money going forward when we can towards our OPEB liability. We did that in the past. We had $500,000 earmarked annually as an outside article. We cut that back when we cut $1.3 million because of COVID-related revenue loss. We need to start addressing that through the tax levy because we're carrying that through a free cash vote every year, and free cash may not be available to fund our OPEB liability in future years. Some of the concerns we have, and early in the presentation, the inflationary factors, these are the things I would like to mention. So we increased our reserve to address inflationary accounts. Here are the items that we see as being volatile and unknown. Motor vehicle fuel, I think we've all seen an increase as a result of many things. And I think it's only going to get worse as we get closer to the travel season and the summer season. So we're expecting an increase in fuel costs. Also, there's a fuel adjustment clause on our solid waste collection contract. That clause may be exercised as a result of diesel going up. We don't know. Certainly heating oil and natural gas, I think we can all expect increases in utility costs, including electricity. Our general liability insurance is a result of claims, a result of settlements, as a result of cybersecurity. I think there's an anticipation that there'll be an increase in those costs in the coming year. Certainly healthcare costs, I think we're looking at a blended 7% increase that's been recommended in the budget tonight. The Insurance Advisory Committee is meeting to pick a provider as a result of Fallon leaving the market. So these are all moving pieces that need to come together and could result in an adjustment. Snow and ice, I can tell you it hasn't been a good year. We've had a number of calls on the weekend, driving up labor costs, overtime costs in battling ice and snow. Also, the price of salt, I think there's an expectation that that's going to go up. And I think we're seeing, as a result of COVID, an increase in the number of retirements. That's driving our benefit cost up in terms of actual retirement benefit payroll cost. So those are some of the items that we are concerned about and want you to be aware of. And we'll continue to monitor those costs as time goes along. So with that, I do want to appreciate, we did receive a number of questions from the board in advance of this meeting, and we tried to get those answers to you prior to this evening. I know there are a few of those questions that you're currently awaiting some information on. We'll get that to you as soon as we can. That being said, I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board may have at this time.
Any questions from board members? Mr. Berthium?
Two. One is on the Bay Path. We were assessed, they did an addition a few years ago, and is the assessment part of this budget figure? So will that be going away at some point?
So, good question. The assessment is included in that 19% increase. When we get an assessment from Bay Path, not only does it include the academic portion, or our share, it also includes the capital, which includes the debt and interest and any associated cost with the addition to and rehab of Bay Path School.
And how many years do we have left on that? I know it was just a few years ago, so it's probably it's gonna go out a little ways.
Yeah, typically a project of that magnitude, I can double check on it, is normally a 30-year purpose.
Okay. And the second thing was the position for the golf course. Is that gonna be a manager that understands grounds, or is that gonna be a business manager that's more in the office part of it?
The business manager portion.
Business manager, okay. And do we have a current groundskeeper, or do highway and grounds?
We have a golf superintendent who's our groundskeeper.
Groundskeeper, okay. Just wanted to make sure. So we're covering both there, okay, thank you.
Any other questions from board members? Mr. Carpenter? Okay.
No, it's not.
Well, I want to thank you both because you got back to me and to everyone in the room who emailed me the questions that I had ahead of today's meeting. I appreciate it. And also, Ed, I appreciate you going over some of them and hitting them while you were doing the presentation, especially with regards to HR and the potholes that everyone's seeing, because that's a concern that, I don't know if anyone else has gotten calls, but I have, because they've been so bad this year. So I do appreciate you touching on both those points. One thing that I just wanted to ask is, with regards to ARPA, and I know, again, you answered this over email, but I just want to ask it in an open meeting. If we're looking at you checking anything off the CIP with the ARPA funds, would that be on this budget and taking, would it lower the 1.26% of 2.5, or are we looking ahead at going into the budget for 2024 and so on?
So I know the ARPA hearings is still open, and I know no final decisions have been made. I think certainly, some of the projects that we identified, there would be a savings in some areas, but it wouldn't be immediate, because those projects are scheduled, I think one is scheduled in 2024 for HVAC work at the public safety facility. And even that was, I think, delayed, because I think there was an expectation that there was a consideration for a new public safety facility, and a lot of those capital costs were basically put on hold until a decision was made with with the direction of that. And ARPA's still open, so I don't know if there are any other considerations that are going to impact CIP at this time. I did review the CIP for FY '23 and saw no immediate savings for the projects that are currently on the drawing board in terms of ARPA consideration.
Okay, great.
So, we do use $1.3 million as part of our funding for our capital plan. If there were some ARPA suggestions that incorporated some of what's being funded through the tax levy, yes, there would be a savings, but currently there aren't any of those projects earmarked.
Right, that's what I wanted to know, if anything would qualify in this year, or if we're looking ahead, and it sounds like we're looking at 2024, I know HVAC and, things coming down the line. Just wanted that to get out there in case anyone had any questions about, because one of the points that came up in the public hearing was that they wanted, or some residents wanted us to use ARPA funds to lower their taxes, and the best way to do that is to go after CIP, as you know. So, thank you for that. If there's nothing else from any other board members, entertain a motion.
Make a motion to transmit the budget to Finance Committee in accordance with the town charter and bylaws.
I'll second that.
Motion has been made and seconded by a roll call vote. Mr. Bertheum?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Back to my agenda. Okay. So under 6C, we have an intermunicipal agreement between the town of Oxford and the town of Auburn for the transportation of wastewater.
Thank you. So we have with us tonight DPW Director Joanna Paquin and our Assistant DPW Director, Nick Schwartz, who's also our sewer superintendent. So I've asked both of them to come tonight to just give the board just a brief overview, again, of what this intermunicipal agreement is. It's been in place for probably a couple of decades anyway, and it came up for renewal a couple of years ago, maybe about a year ago, actually, and we're seeking an extension on it. So we're seeking a 9-month extension. So first of all, I want to thank Joanna and Nick because they put a lot of time into this and trying to do their evaluation and analysis and see what the capacity is of our system, what the costs are. Are we charging the appropriate amount? Are we covering our costs for the future? And there are a lot of questions that are still unknown. So we did meet, was it about 10 days ago, with Oxford, their town manager and their DPW director, and trying to come up with a plan of how we're going to tackle this issue. But in the meantime, we have this agreement that expires in a couple of weeks. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to both Nick and Joanna to give an overview, because I do think we have two members that maybe were not here when we renewed this about a year ago, when we extended it.
So I'm not exactly sure when the original agreement was signed. The last agreement that the board had signed was on March 14th, and that was a 1-year extension of a 5-year agreement. And basically, it's an agreement for a small portion of Oxford's wastewater flow to be directed towards our infrastructure and down to the Upper Blackstone clean water. So basically, when about a year ago, the original agreement was about to expire, and because there were some turnover in personnel in both Oxford and Auburn, as well as everything that was going on with COVID, we needed a little bit of time to kind of figure out where we stand. In addition to the fact that Oxford's looking at some development, they have a few projects that they have lined up, so they don't really know. There's a lot of unknowns as to how much flow that they're expecting from those projects, and even where they're going to be directing them, or how they're going to be directing them. So while we're sort of waiting on kind of more information from Oxford on our end, we want to address some of the things that we're concerned with the current agreement. There's some things that we want to make sure that they're captured Like, the rates that we charge them are based on on the value of our system, in addition to what we're getting charged by Upper Blackstone. And some things that I don't think are really captured are things like emergencies. So if we have to pump wastewater from one station to another, and that wastewater had originally come from Oxford, we want to capture some of that, in addition to overall trying to find an easier way of calculating the yearly costs that we charge to Oxford. There's a fixed cost and a variable cost, a rate per gallon. And it's kind of a very cumbersome way of doing it, calculation, and we need to get consultants involved to evaluate our system. So we want to be able to capture some of the costs associated with even figuring out the cost, what we need to charge. So we just want to make sure that we're capturing, and we're obviously being fair to Oxford, but we're capturing the fees that's due to Auburn. So we're looking for a 9-month extension to be able to look at the process and update the contract accordingly.
Board members have any, Ms. Brithy?
I think, appreciate you doing that, because, costs are doing nothing but going up, and, Oxford, I'm sure, should be happy to pay their fair share, where we're basically bailing them out by having the waterway there, or the sewerway there. So, yeah, absolutely, you're doing a good job, and take the time that you need to make sure that it's thorough before we propose it.
Absolutely what Mr. Bertham said, you have my vote to take the time you need to get this right. Remember being on planning board, and there was talk about Blaker Street and some projects up in Oxford in that area, and we're getting capacity in that area, and isn't that where some of the sharing, where this is happening?
Correct. That's exactly the area that they'd be trying to tie into.
Yep.
We're next been working on looking at the capacity of our system. We had some evaluations of our pump stations,
Yep.
but then next been kind of going over a little bit above and beyond just the simple capacity of the pump stations, but also with the sewer lines, and
Yep.
making sure that we're comfortable with how much flow that they might be proposing, in addition to making sure that for future developments in Auburn would be able to happen without any issues.
Gotcha. Without adding more pumping stations.
Or increasing the size of the pipes.
Okay. All right, that's all I have.
Glad you asked that, because that was a question from town meeting before, and I think we talked about that in the past. Are there any other questions from board members?
I just have a few, Mr. Chairman, if everybody's done.
Yep, go ahead, Mr. Carpenter.
Thing, or you good?
I think she covered it pretty well.
So I got 4 citations that I'll just share with you, just so that, I'm not sure if you have the agreement in front of you. So on page 2, section 1.4, page 4, section 4.3, page 5, section 5 to 5.3, and page 8 to 4.
Is it not matching up with what you have?
It's not, they're not numbered, so,
And if you need me to repeat them, I can certainly do that. That's not a problem.
If you could, please.
Yeah, please.
So the first one is page 2, section 1.4. Page 4, 4.3. I can do these one at a time. I just figured it might be easier if I just did all of them. Page 5, 5.0 to 5.3. And then finally, page 8, 8.4.
Okay.
So,
Well, I'm sorry, what was that last one?
8 to 8.4.
8 to 8.4.
Joanna or Nick, can you just repeat what you've got so we make sure it's the same?
So I have section 1.4, 4.3, section 5.0 to 5.3, and section 8 to 8.4.
Dan, did you get that? Was that right?
yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay.
What I'm looking at on the release.
So, just the first citation, I was just somewhat interested in what kind of inspections, how often these are done, and have there been any issues discovered during these inspections?
So as far as the inspections of the wastewater, we really haven't had any inspections. We do have some flexibility in making sure that the wastewater that goes in there doesn't have as much grease, or it doesn't have too much grease. So we worked with the Board of Health to make sure that a restaurant that apparently was not maintaining a grease trap, to kind of convince them of the need for that maintenance. So I guess we leveraged the contract and, you know, the IMA to make sure that that we weren't taking in that grease from the restaurant in Oxford. So not really inspections, but there is, you know, that aspect of it, of not taking in material that shouldn't be going through our system.
Okay. On 4.3, I didn't get an B, so I wasn't sure what the formula was when we touched on the fact that it's quite, you know, cumbersome, but.
If it helps, I can forward the spreadsheet that is used to calculate that to the board.
It's up to the board members if I just happened to notice it and I didn't have one, so I don't know if everybody else, you know, it was just an oversight or whatever.
I'd be interested in seeing the sheet, if you just send it along.
I don't need to see it.
I don't need to see it.
And just section 5 to 5.3, I was just, and I think you touched on this, just wondering about what the reason for these specific volumes are, and have they gone over it? Is this an increase from the prior contract?
At this point, we're not looking to increase the flow. I think that at this point, Oxford is looking to work within that 100,000 gallon, but I guess if what their proposed developments, you know, if they come to fruition, then they might be looking to increase that flow, but that would be up to the board to approve, and obviously we would be looking at our capacity.
And if I can jump in too, just to be clear, so this agreement that you have before you has no changes from the original agreement signed at this point 6 years ago. So it was a 5-year agreement. So whatever was signed at that time has not changed. So we would have pointed out if there was anything in here, so I can just assure you there's nothing, no language in here that's brand new. Some of this may be revised after we get the studies done and we continue to work with them. But right now, you're not
That would be
seeing
the
any,
next
that would be the next
go
step.
at it.
We just want to make sure you understand, we haven't changed anything that's been in place. And Mr. Carpenter, they're great questions, because those have been our questions with Oxford as well, which is one of the reasons we need to pursue having this joint study, because we need answers to some of those questions before we make any changes to the written agreement.
And just kind of a follow-up on that, when we're talking about these projects, what is the approval process? Do they go to Oxford when they need to do connections, or do they go to Oxford and Auburn? How is that handled?
Well, as far as the projects themselves, I would assume that they would just go through Oxford. Most of these projects, well, I think all of these projects don't have any, they're not located in the town of Auburn, so they wouldn't need to have any approvals from us. It would just depend on whether or not they connect to sewer, or they have to go with septic systems to service those projects.
Yeah, I know we wouldn't approve them like through the planning board. I was wondering if they're gonna submit drawings to the sewer division, the sewer commission is gonna go through it, or is this all done, the sewer connection and the approvals are all done on the Oxford side?
So the approvals would be on the Oxford side. We would definitely need to have more information if they were looking to tie in the new developments into our system, so that we knew what kind of flows we'd be expecting.
Okay, thank you. And the last one, I think, is just the 8.4. I noticed on 8.5, it says, no charge for Joe, only if he is on call for Auburn, but it isn't in 8.4, so I wasn't sure if that was an oversight, or if that language needs to be included in the 8.4.
I think that is kind of obsolete language, just because we've been charging we've been charging a rate for our employees, so whenever they go there, it's not on town time, it's overtime, and we charge them the overtime rate plus, I think, a 30% benefit as well. And then the cost for the jetback truck, we use the current FEMA rates, so those rates are changing on a yearly basis, and based on whatever we pay for our employees.
And this will be updated 9 months from now to reflect whatever those actual costs are that we need to determine. Because we want to make sure that we're charging the appropriate amount. We don't want to overcharge, but we want to make sure that we're covering all of our costs at the time that we enter into a new agreement.
There's language further on in the contract that kind of dictates what the in 8.6, it dictates the 30% fringe benefits, and then 8.8, the FEMA rate for the jetback truck. So they're not exactly what, I think the rates that are in 8.4 are more for the first year of the contract, but those got updated whenever those rates were changing.
And Joe has retired.
And Joe has retired.
So there is no Joe. On the Auburn side, anyway.
Great.
So should we take that language out and just leave in the wage minimums, or?
Dan, I think that's a conversation for another day. They just need the extension at this point, and then they'd bring back the contract to us on the next
Right.
IMA.
Correct.
Correct. I think much of this language may change, certainly with regard to staffing at this point. You know, I think one of our recommendations would be probably to not have name individuals by name, but to just be more generic, because you don't want to be going back to both boards for votes every time you have an employee change. But I think right now we are charging the appropriate amount that we had agreed on with them. So that language, as Joanna said, it's obsolete, but I don't think it hurts to leave it in there, because this is the current agreement that we're asking to extend.
We're not reworking a contract right now, we're extending it.
So we're basically using the rates that are set in 8.6.
Anything else from any other board members? Comments or questions? I'm fine with it as written, for the reasons that Scott pointed out. I'll entertain a motion to extend for 9 months, you said?
Correct.
9 months.
Make that motion? I'll make that motion that we extend the intermunicipal agreement between the town of Oxford and the town of Auburn for the transportation of wastewater. The current agreement, that we extend that for 9 months. So that would be March 1st through November 30th. Is that what we're looking for? Of 2022?
I think it was
Be the 14th
November
to
14th, thank you.
December, I would think, right?
You want to go to the 14th of December?
That's 9 months.
Okay, so to the 14th of December.
We're
So
all-
from March 1st to, all
Make that motion.
I'll second.
right, by a roll call vote. Mr. Berthium?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Thank you both.
I know, thank you. I just want to, again, thank them. They're really doing a great job, and this is complicated. Also, to let you know, just as you're aware, IMAs need to be voted on by boards of each participating community in the IMA under Mass General Law. So Oxford Board of Selectmen will also be voting on this this week or next week, prior to the date on the 14th. I can't recall when their meeting is, but, so they will also be taking a vote. And if you would, while we have 3 of you anyway, want to pass down this to sign.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. That was signed under Oxford's Board of Selectmen.
Sir.
Do we know when Oxford, you said that sometime this week, so I'm guessing you don't know when their Board of Selectmen meets?
I'm going to assume you.
I will have to double check that. I know when we met with them, their meeting was going to be after your meeting. So it's definitely either this week or next week.
Okay.
Through the chair, if you don't mind, I know we finished this item, but while DPW was here, because one of the board members asked a really good question about whether we changed our salt composition, and I know we got a couple of calls in the office just because the color on the roads is different. I thought if it would be okay with you if Joanna Pakeman just quickly explained why the roads look a little different with the treatment for the snow and ice. It's not
Sure.
anything you need to vote on, but it might help answer some of the questions that you're getting from residents.
Sorry. So the town of Auburn procures its salt through a consortium of, I believe it's 31 towns and the Upper Blackstone. And this year, the bid goes out in August, or it gets awarded in August, and this year the lowest bidder was Morton Salt. And so there's a small percentage of the recipe for the salt, because it's treated with magnesium chloride. A small percentage of it is a starch that will aid in preventing the clumping of the salt. And Morton Salt actually uses a derivative of molasses to use that. So this year's salt, it looks a little bit like molasses because it's brown, and if you went into our salt shed, you would actually smell molasses too. So it's still a treated salt. It's just a little bit of a different recipe. But because the lowest bidder was Morton Salt, they use they all have a proprietary combination of things that they use to treat that salt.
Thank you.
Everything you wanted to know
Oh,
about
sure.
salt.
Yeah, Mr. Berthium?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, quick question, and you may or may not have the answer to it. I notice in Worcester now, especially like up around the airport, like the day before, we're gonna have a storm, there's like liquid lines. Is that just another version of an ice melt? And, is that something that's available through the consortium? Is that something that you need special trucks and apparatus to spread?
So that's called a brine, and you need special equipment to apply it. It's basically a salt solution that they spray on the road in preparation for the storm. So when the storm starts, you have a little bit of salt left over from the day before, so it's not, so you have a little bit more time to apply the actual, the granule material. It doesn't really last that long because it's already diluted, so by the time that it goes on the street, the previous day, it got applied, it dried up, there's still salt there, but it's not as much of a concentration as what we put on the road right before a storm. Auburn's a little bit different than Worcester, just because it takes us about an hour and a half to 2 hours to salt the entire town, whereas Worcester can take up to 8 hours, so they don't have that flexibility where, we can hit the town pretty quickly. For them, that little brine that they can put on, at least it's buying them a little bit of time, where we don't,
So it's not really something we need then?
at this point, I don't think so, just because we have the capability of really hitting the town very quickly.
Okay.
In an event where it's an icing situation, where it's a flash freeze, sometimes we need a little bit more time, just because everything freezes up all at once, but hopefully, the meteorologists get it, give us a little bit of a warning.
That's a great answer, thank you.
Thank you.
And if you would like, at a later date, maybe we can have a surprise guest come before you. The deputy commissioner. I'm sure he'd be willing to happy to talk to you about brining the city streets.
Before you go, I do have a question for you. Is the new salt better for pets' feet? Because I know there's salt that they make that's better for people with dogs.
We made sure that whatever certifications that the previous company had, the additives that are used in the Morton salt have the same certifications.
Thanks.
With molasses, it must make that
But,
buzz
you know.
taste.
Hopefully they don't lick them, but.
Thank you.
All right. Under 60, we have the board and commission training for March 21st, 2022. This is the open meeting law, or not, open meeting law that was originally scheduled that had to be canceled because of COVID. I just got my letter in the mail today from the town clerk, letting us know that it was changed. Unfortunately, I won't be able to make the March 21st one, but hopefully some members of the boards and commissions in town are able to. I don't know if there's anything
Great,
you want to add.
yes, so that's a great point that you make. So that meeting will be, the training will be held at 6 PM here in this room. It will be hybrid, so we recognize that not everyone can make it to the building. So if someone wants to or is able to log in, they can watch it remotely and participate remotely. We'll also have it taped. So if you can't do any of that, you can look at it after. So there's 3 components to it. One is Robert's Rules, the other is Conflict of Interest Law, and the last one is the open meeting law. And it's just to provide the tools that we need to give to our board and commission members to make sure that they are comfortable in their positions representing the town. And Town Council Robert Hennigan gives the training, and we skipped it for a couple of years due to COVID, so we're glad to be back doing this again.
It's a Wednesday?
It's
Is
a-
it a Wednesday?
It's a Monday.
Monday, okay.
It's a Monday?
It's the Monday in between your 2 meetings.
Yep.
So Monday, the 14th, and then Monday, so your ARPA hearing would be March
Okay, yeah.
14th, and this would be a week later on March 21st. So there was no board meeting in here that night, but we were open, and it's at 6 PM. The first one we scheduled, Mr. Berthium, that one was, I believe, a Tuesday. And that was because we were trying to work around a couple different schedules and meeting areas. So yes, and everybody should have, we prepared a letter that we asked the town clerk to send by hard copy as well as by email to all the board and committee members. Great.
All right. Any other questions or comments regarding the open meeting law meeting? No. Okay. Seeing none, we also have a vote to authorize the town manager to apply for, accept, and expend a shared street grant.
Thank you. So we added this today. We actually found out last week that the deadline for submission of a grant is tomorrow. So while Joanna and Nick are here, I want to thank them for meeting with Ed and I this morning, along with Chief Todd Lemon and Joe Fahey, the Director of Facilities at the schools. So we have an opportunity to apply for funding through the Shared Streets Program. We recently received a $280,000 grant for Shared Streets that allowed us to do some reconstruction and walkways and pedestrian pathways on Brotherton Way. And that, we received that grant, and that work was completed by, I think we had until May 31st. Real quick deadline last year, and we completed that. So we are eligible to apply again. This year, the state is prioritizing these grants for what they're terming as speed management. So they're trying to make an effort through the Shared Streets Program to address high accident rates, pedestrian safety, and eliminate or reduce the amount of crashes across the state. So that would be a priority grant application to submit. So we met today, and the police department, the police chief was very excited about this, as was Joe Fahey from the schools, because through this grant, we would be seeking funding to do some strategic positioning of both signage as well as speed control equipment. And that would also include possibly adding new crosswalks near certain areas, which I'll explain in a minute, and also seeing if we can do some ADA improvements. So it's a comprehensive plan, and it is a comprehensive speed management plan, and it's all in trying to reduce speeds of vehicular traffic in and around our schools in particular, and our parks and playgrounds, as well as our areas where we have congregating seniors, such as the Senior Center, Kateri, Packagug Village, Stoneville Heights, those areas where we have seniors that may be doing more walking to get from one place to another, students that are taking the bus in the morning. So by reducing the speeds and trying to manage your speeds, we're hopefully creating a safer environment for the pedestrians in that area, and particularly focusing again on youth and seniors. Those are the two focus groups that the state would like to see, and it just so happens to be the areas that we feel are the most in need. We can't do every single area in town, so this is really just a starting on addressing those. So we're looking to put a sign on each side and some speed control equipment on each side in the areas of all the schools. And the Bryn Mawr would be more on the Oxford Street area, because that would also affect Lemansky Park, the skating rink, and all the traffic going in and out of there. And up on Packagug, not just near the school, but also affects the Senior Center, Kateri, and some of the other senior areas. So we're in the process of getting this all done by tomorrow morning. So we have to provide grant GPS coordinates, so I want to thank Nick for getting those coordinates for all these locations. He got that quickly, and Joanna and Nick working to get a budget, and Nick forwarded the budget to the police department. The police department is in the process of getting some quotes on some of this equipment. We'll insert all of that and hopefully submit this electronically tomorrow. So the reason we're here tonight is to ask you for your support to allow us to submit this. I don't have a cost for you right now, but there's no match requirement. So we don't have to come up with any tax levy dollars to do this. This is just, the maximum grant we can apply for is $200,000. I don't think we're gonna come close to that based on the type of equipment and needs that we have, but we just wanted to get your approval to go forward and put this in tomorrow.
Ms. Brother?
Just based on people calling in the past, I'd ask you to consider Hampton Street being a very busy street, not much for sidewalks, and, especially over by the Jerome Street area. I know my mother got T-boned there several years ago, and there seems to be a lot of fast traffic in that Jerome Hampton Street area. So I'm sure that's not the only one, but I know a resident has called me on that in the past, and I've, let, you know, the police know, and they, I believe, tried to put some of our portable signage there to get people to slow down, so that would be at least one area that I'd like to see considered for this.
Sure, we can take a look at it. I believe there was a requirement that there either be a school or a park or a senior facility within 1 mile of where you're positioning. So we just have to look at the radius and make sure that where we place it would cover that.
As the crow flies, you're probably looking at 2 football fields to Hampton Street.
Yep. So, while we're here, Nick, is that possible to redo that locus map and? I know, I know, I'm just asking, 'cause
I
know.
apologize.
You want to run to your office?
And
But
that,
when
in
we
the
get
budget.
calls from our constituents, we kind of need to address those, so, no, that, I apologize for putting extra work on you.
No, that's okay. We, I just want to make sure, could that be done, and then add that to the budget? So whatever information we get back from the police department on the type of equipment, we can just add 2 more units in that area. But we have to figure out exactly where it's going to go. They're requiring GPS coordinates. We just aren't allowed to say this generally.
Oh, okay.
Hampton and Jerome. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Sometimes when we get complaints about speed limits, we'll ask the police department to do a traffic study, and it will turn out that the speed limit that we should be posting is higher than what is existing. So, we don't want to encourage people going faster, so we just want to make sure that, you know, what's out there is, you know, what we can actually enforce, and also want to make sure that, where we put it makes sense for the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So that's what we were doing this morning, looking at all these places and, looking at where we can place this equipment, you know, so that it fits in with the community.
Okay, thank you.
We can definitely look at it, and
Yeah,
if it works.
just consider, that's, yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
It is worth considering, because I've heard from people on Hampton Street too. I don't know, that's the same, that's probably, I've actually heard from a couple of people on Hampton, so I think one might be the same person, but a couple others. So thanks for bringing that up. Is there anything else on this before we take a vote? Seeing none?
I'll make a motion to authorize the town manager to apply for, accept, and expend a shared streets grant.
I will second that.
By a roll call vote, Mr. Berthium.
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter.
Yes.
Mr. Rent.
Yes.
The chair votes yes.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you both. All right, under tabled items, we have none. And under select board member items, I asked to put this on for a discussion and proposed registered marijuana dispensary bylaw amendment. There are a couple things that I want to accomplish with this. First of all, I'm just asking everyone that we put this bylaw amendment on the town meeting warrant this coming May. Since we've opened the warrant, we can throw it on. To do so, we've got to submit it to the planning board and also send it to the zoning board for review. So both of them will have a chance to look at it, decide whether or not they want to endorse it as well. The 3 things that I want to accomplish with it, first of all, the temporary moratorium that you all might remember was passed. Actually, Scott, I think you were on planning when they put that on.
I took the vote, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was years ago now.
Yeah.
It's expired, I believe.
Right, yeah, it expired in 2018, but it's still on the books. I actually got an email from someone the other day that was asking about it, if the town had intended to extend the moratorium. Of course, the town added the bylaw to ban recreational dispensaries, so that bylaw is moot at this point, so I'd just assume take it off. So that's part of this, to clean up those zoning bylaws. The second thing is to reduce restrictions that I don't think have proved necessary for medical dispensaries. As you all know, we have a ban in the bylaws that prevents recreational dispensaries from coming to town. But some of the restrictions that have been put in place for medical dispensaries, I think have been a little excessive and have prevented the development of any of those kind of facilities in town. They might have been really necessary at the time, we weren't sure what we were getting into, but I think since then, we've learned a little bit more, we've seen what other communities have done, and they're not really needed. One of them in particular is no RMD shall be located within the Zone 2 aquifer and watershed protection overlay. At the time, we weren't sure how these facilities were going to grow. Maybe there was going to be something in the fertilizer, if they were going to grow them in fields. Now we know that the state's requiring these to be grown indoors, so things like that I don't think are necessary anymore, and that the town would benefit from removing those kinds of restrictions. And finally, the last part is to remove the ban that was put in place on recreational dispensaries. Again, I think this is something that the town should really consider looking at legalizing. We've seen every community around us legalize recreational dispensaries, so I think we're getting all of the problems and none of the tax benefit from Oxford, Millbury, Leicester, and now Worcester as well. So I'd like the board to consider putting all three of these before zoning, before planning, and on the town meeting warrant. Be happy to talk about it further and hold off vote until we have a full board. I'll ask the town manager, how long do we have to actually put something before the town meeting warrant? Because if we're going to send this to ZBA and planning, I want to make sure that they have time.
So the town warrant closes on March 7th, but if you vote tonight to put
Placeholder.
the revision, yes, then you're fine. So
Okay.
put a placeholder, then that often happens, it happened with the zoning that you heard earlier tonight on the 48 multifamily housing. So that simultaneously goes on the warrant, at the same time it goes through the planning board process under Mass General Law. So I just want to make sure, so I think there's one, is it one bylaw that you're proposing to put on the?
Yeah, right now it's
Okay.
one
It's one.
comprehensive.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what I'm hoping to get through. Love to talk to other members, see what everyone else is thinking. Yeah, Mr. Griffin.
100% agree.
I also couldn't agree more. I remember being on the planning board, and we said we wanted to know more. We wanted to see how things shook out, so to speak. We've seen it. Now we have a bylaw that's in place that's, expired in terms of the moratorium.
Right.
Talks about aquifers when it's indoor growth. It's just a misguided bylaw. It's not right. And the biggest thing for me is when we want to see how these things shook out is the state guidelines for these places is very restrictive. They're run very well. If you go from here to Holden, you're going to come across 7 of them. And if you look at the numbers of what these towns are bringing in between fees and excise taxes, we're talking $600,000-$700,000 to a budget. That is huge. We're talking about tax splits and lowering residential tax rates, and we're not going to be business friendly to a burgeoning market. I think we're missing the ball here, so you have my absolute support on that.
Anything else from any other members? Seeing none, is there a motion?
What does the motion have to be? I wasn't clear. on
Yeah,
the point.
so
Should put a placeholder.
a placeholder on the town meeting warrant, and to also send this proposed bylaw to the zoning board of appeals and planning board.
So you could take 2
I
separate
make
votes.
a motion what he said. Do you have that, Sharon?
Yes, I do.
Do we need to add any instructions to planning and ZBA that go along with?
I don't think so. I think
Okay.
your vote will be fine, because
Okay.
this is standard procedure for any bylaw changes to go to them. And again, I was explaining to the chair, that zoning bylaw review committee, it's not required under the law, it's just we have a zoning bylaw review committee. We typically send things to them for recommendation, but they're advisory. And then the planning board is a required process. And I think you had asked the question, what would happen, if the planning board, for any reason, didn't support it? I'm not saying they would or wouldn't, but it still goes on the warrant.
Right.
It absolutely still goes to town meeting. The requirement is not for the planning board to approve of it, it's for the planning board to hold a public hearing on it. so you should be fine.
I'll second that motion.
All right, motion's been made and seconded by roll call vote. Mr. Berthium?
Yes.
Mr. Carpenter? Oh, we lost him. Dan, you're not callers. Are you caller 6 or 7?
Do you have that in your packet? Is there a draft? It's in there. Is that in your packet?
Draft for what?
Of the bylaw.
Okay.
While you're doing that, I just want to make sure, do you have the draft that you are sending?
I don't
so-
have it in my packet. I have, I was
Okay,
just
so
looking
it
for
is the draft that you sent to me
It's
the
the
other
draft that I
day?
sent, yeah.
Okay, I didn't see it in the packet either, and I apologize. I thought maybe it was just my packet that was missing a piece, so we will, the one that you sent me, it would be the one that we would
Yeah.
forward along.
I didn't even notice it until a few minutes ago because I
didn't
had
either.
my draft that I was reading the whole week, and I just picked up the packet before I came in, so I was looking for it and pulled it up.
So
in
what
the
we can
email.
do is I can send it, well, Adam will send it to the planning board, but I can ask Sharon to send it to all of you, so you'll see what the actual draft of this was. How's that?
Um,
Sharon, would you be able to do that tomorrow, to just send the board members?
Yes,
That would be great.
Yes.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right, while I'm waiting for Dan, I'll just give the rest of the vote. Mr. Wren?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Yeah, it doesn't look like his caller's disappeared from the line, and I haven't heard back from him. I'll give him a couple of minutes to respond, but the motion passes by unanimous for the 3 that are present. So,
While we're waiting for that, Mr. Chair?
Yep.
It's not on our agenda, but I would like to recognize that Jack Haroyan passed away last week, and Jack was on the Bay Path School Committee. He's currently on the Bay Path School Committee. He would have been up for re-election. It's my understanding that it wasn't his intention, I think, because of his health. But Jack served, if I have the numbers right, served our town on the Bay Path School Committee from 2008 to 2022, and I think did a wonderful job. He was always very respectful. He was a gentleman, and he'll be greatly missed, and I'd like to send our condolences to the Haroyan family and thank them for the service. Thank you.
thank you for bringing that up. I just heard back from Dan that he lost Wi-Fi and to finish the meeting with Adam, so we'll just count that vote with the 3 members that were present. And with that, we have the minutes from December 13th. Any corrections? Seeing none, we'll accept it. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Good night.